On January 15, 1966, a dissident unit of the Nigerian army led by Majors Emmanuel Ifeajuna and Kaduna Nziogu carried out Nigeria's first coup d'etat. The coup would lead to the end of the First Republic and the assassination of the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the Premier of the Western Region, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola, and the Minister for Finance, Chief Festus Samuel Okotie Ebo. Also, some senior military officers would lose their lives. However, the coup was not entirely successful as the most senior officer in the Nigerian army, Major General Johnson Thomas Omonakwe Aguiyi-Ironsi, foiled the coup, rounded up the boys, and took charge of the country. On Monday, 17 January 1966, Aguiyi-Ironsi suspended the Nigerian constitution and instituted the Supreme Military Council. The military era had begun. Major General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, the Nigerian Army's commanding officer, rapidly took over and set about re-establishing law and order. However, the fundamental objectives of the Ironsi dictatorship coincided with those of the coup leaders: restoring law and order, preserving basic services, eliminating regionalism and tribalism, and putting an end to corruption. Ironsi predicted that his administration would last only until the people's wishes were reflected in a new constitution. In each of the regions, Ironsi appointed military governors and outlawed political parties. Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegu Ojukwu, the new governor of the Eastern region, was one of these new military governors. At first, especially in the south, the military takeover and Ironsi's ascension were cheered. For many people in the south, the overthrow of the civilian government signaled the end of a plan for northern domination. Jubilation greeted the fall of the unpopular NNDP rule in the western region, and the violence and turmoil that had dogged the area since the elections in October came to an almost immediate halt. The ensuing policies of Ironsi as head of state, however, frightened many northerners who began to see the coup and Ironsi as components of a scheme by southern, mainly Igbo officers to use the military to impose a new period of Igbo dominance. Circumstantial evidence supported this theory in numerous ways. First off, the ringleaders of the January coup were Igbo. Only one was Yoruba. Also, the majority of the casualties were northerners. The two most important politicians in the north, Balewa and Bello, together with their ally Akintola, were killed, although the premiers of the mid-western and eastern regions were detained but later released. Many believe that this pattern demonstrated that the coup was essentially an Igbo attack on the north. Ironsi made various decisions in the first half of 1966 that worsened the situation by giving many northerners reason to think that he was part of an Igbo conspiracy. Instead of having the coup plotters put on trial for the crimes that the northerners believed they had done, Ironsi stalled and jailed them. Additionally, Ironsi was resented for accelerating the promotion of Igbo officers more quickly than their peers, even though it was merited. Decree number 34 of May 24, 1966, in which Ironsi formally abolished the federal system and replaced it with a unitary system, was, in the eyes of northerners, the most damning piece of evidence against him. The regional organization of Nigeria vanished and was replaced by groups of provinces. The military and civil service, which had hitherto been administered locally, were to be combined and run from the same location. The northerners feared and saw this as an actual Igbo dominance. Now, the possibility of having southern military officers occupy it and southern civil officials run its government existed. As a result, there were massive protests against the Ironsi regime across northern Nigeria. The situation reached its peak on July 29, 1966, when a group of northern non-commissioned officers and officers of the 4th Battalion in Ibadan arrested the head of state and killed him. The Aguiyi-Ironsi regime had come to an end. July rematch was the code name of Nigeria's second military coup. The fact that the majority of the coup plotters were Igbos and the coup was labeled an Igbo coup was one of the causes of the counter-coup in Nigeria on July 29, 1966. Although the coup was planned by military commanders from several ethnic nationalities in Nigeria, not simply Igbo military officers, the northern military officers then promised to exact revenge. They were angry at Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi for doing nothing, so they held diverse meetings to plan a counter-coup. With assistance from the local government, roving gangs committed the program in May 1966. Furthermore, it is generally known that the already high level of tension was exacerbated by some of the unruly behavior of the international press. Also, plans by the northern elites to instigate violence included fabricating news reports to Radio Cotonou and replaying them over the BBC's Hausa station, documenting inflated attacks against northerners in the east, which led to the brutal slaughter of eastern Nigerians on September 29, 1966. Estimates from British newspapers at the time placed the death toll among the Igbo at between 10 and 30,000 in September 1966. This murderous rampage and carnage, which began in late September and occasionally had the help of soldiers, was aimed at the entire northern region. On July 28, 1966, after midnight, a mutiny led by Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed turned into a coup. General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, the first military head of state of Nigeria, and Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi, who was hosting Aguiyi-Ironsi when he was visiting Ibadan, were both killed. Disgruntled northern non-commissioned officers committed the assassination. Lagos also turned violent at the same time, and a sizable number of Igbos, likely over 250,000, fled to the east from the north. Between September 29 and October 4, 1966, nearly 2,000 Igbos were killed in the north, according to existing records. For 3 days, Nigeria struggled without a leader until the most senior northern officer in the Nigerian army, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, was chosen as the new head of state and supreme commander of the armed forces. He was just 31. Quickly, Gowon repealed Decree No. 34 in a bid to please the northerners and the regime's commitment to federation while honoring regional differences. However, in the eastern region, the Igbo military governor, Lieutenant Colonel Emeka Ojukwu, had severe misgivings about the legitimacy of the counter-coup and refused to recognize the new leadership in Lagos. Ojukwu argued that even if Ironsi was dead, there were still living senior army officers who had a greater claim to the title of Supreme Commander than Gowon. These officers all had higher ranks and more experience than Gowon. Ironsi's death and Gowon's ascension, however, did not stop the wanton killings of the Igbo people in northern Nigeria, and this was more of a concern for Ojukwu than Gowon's new office. Even though Gowon denounced the killings, the federal military government did nothing to stop it, and about 80,000 Easterners were killed in a series of massacres during this time, the deadliest of which was committed on September 29, 1966, by northern soldiers. Retaliatory deaths of northerners living in the eastern region resulted from these massacres. Such occurrences made Ojukwu doubt if Igbos could ever coexist peacefully inside a federal Nigeria. In addition to advising other northerners in the east to follow suit, he pleaded with all Easterners who were outside the region to return home. As a result, there were significant demographic shifts in the second half of 1966 and the beginning of 1967. Gowon was adamant about keeping the East within the Federation, even as Ojukwu was considering secession because the Easterners were no longer safe in one Nigeria. The tension between the two leaders would last until January 1967, when Gowon and Ojukwu met at a neutral ground outside the country in Aburi, Ghana, to reach a peaceful agreement and the way forward for Nigeria and its political system. You can check out the full story on the Aburi meeting in our next episode.